Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. Looking back, the whole thing felt like a movie. A low-budget horror flick with terrible acting and a plot that defied all logic. And like a character in one of those movies, I ignored every glaring red flag because I was lonely and desperate for some kind of human connection. It all started on Hinge, of course. Hinge, the app that claims to be designed to be deleted, turned out to be the catalyst for a series of events that I'm still trying to process. I had been using it for a few months, cycling through the usual cast of characters. The gym bros, the guys who only talked about their jobs, the ones who sent unsolicited pictures. It was exhausting and demoralizing, but I kept swiping, hoping to find anyone, who seemed even remotely normal. That's when I matched with Liam. His profile was different from the others. No shirtless selfies, no bragging about his accomplishments. Just a few candid photos of him hiking in the mountains, reading in a coffee shop, and playing with a dog at a park. His bio was short and sweet. Looking for someone to explore the world with. It was cliché, sure, but it was a refreshing change from the usual garbage I saw on the app. We started chatting, and I was immediately drawn to his intelligence and wit. He was well-read, articulate, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. We talked about everything: books, movies, politics, our hopes and dreams. It felt like I had finally found someone who saw me as more than just a picture on a screen. He wasn't conventionally attractive, I guess. Kind of lanky with perpetually messy brown hair and these intense, dark eyes. But he had this quirky charm that I found incredibly endearing. He was awkward, but in a cute way, like he wasn't trying to be anything other than himself. We messaged each other for hours every day for about 2 weeks before he suggested we meet in person. I was hesitant at first. I had been burned before, and I was afraid that the real Liam wouldn't live up to the image I had created in my head. But he was so persistent, and I was so eager to meet him, that I eventually agreed. He suggested we go for a walk in a local park, which seemed like a safe and low-pressure option. The day of the date, I was a nervous wreck. I spent hours getting ready, trying on different outfits and agonizing over my hair and makeup. I wanted to make a good impression, but I also wanted to be myself. Eventually, I settled on a simple jeans and t-shirt combo, figuring that it was better to be comfortable than to try too hard. When I arrived at the park, Liam was already there, waiting for me by the entrance. He was wearing a faded denim jacket and a pair of worn-out boots, and he looked even more charming in person than he did in his photos. We started walking, and the conversation flowed easily. We talked about our favorite hiking trails, our families, and our mutual love of obscure indie bands. It felt like we had known each other for years. As we walked deeper into the park, the crowds thinned out, and the atmosphere became more secluded. The trees grew taller, the shadows grew longer, and the air grew colder. I started to feel a little uneasy, but I brushed it off, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. We eventually reached a clearing where there was a small pond surrounded by weeping willow trees. It was a beautiful spot, but there was something about it that made me feel uncomfortable. Liam led me to a bench overlooking the pond, and we sat down to rest. He started talking about his childhood, telling me about his parents and his siblings. He seemed to be opening up to me in a way that I hadn't expected. But then, the conversation took a strange turn. He started talking about his fascination with death and the afterlife. He said that he believed that there was more to reality than what we could see, and that he was searching for a way to connect with the other side. I tried to change the subject, but he was insistent. He kept talking about death, describing it in graphic detail, and speculating about what it would be like to experience it. I was starting to feel really creeped out, but I didn't want to be rude, so I just nodded and listened, hoping that he would eventually stop. Then, he turned to me and said, "Have you ever wondered what it would be like to die?" I froze. I didn't know how to respond. I just stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. He reached out and took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I think it would be beautiful," he whispered, "to finally be free from the constraints of this world." I tried to pull my hand away, but he wouldn't let go. His eyes were fixed on mine, and there was a strange glint in them that I had never seen before. "Don't you want to know what it's like?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't you want to experience the ultimate transformation?" I was terrified. I knew that something was seriously wrong. I finally managed to yank my hand away and stood up, backing away from him slowly. I have to go," I stammered. He stood up as well, his expression unreadable. "Why?" he asked. "We were just getting started." "I'm not feeling well," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to go home." He didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching me with those intense, dark eyes. I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached the park entrance. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if he was following me. I hailed a cab and gave the driver my address, my hand shaking so badly that I could barely hold onto my phone. When I finally got home, I locked the door and collapsed onto my bed, sobbing. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had gone on a date with a potential psychopath. For weeks after that, I was paranoid. I kept the doors locked and the windows closed, and I jumped at every little sound. I couldn't shake the feeling that Liam was watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. I reported him to Hinge, but they said that they couldn't do anything without more evidence. I considered going to the police, but I didn't have any proof that he had done anything wrong. It was just my word against his. Eventually, the fear subsided, but I never fully recovered from the experience. I stopped using dating apps altogether, convinced that I would never find a normal, sane person online. But the story doesn't end there. A few months later, I was scrolling through the local news website when I saw a headline that made my blood run cold. "Missing woman found dead in local park." The article described how a young woman had been found murdered in the same park where I had gone on my date with Liam. The police were investigating, but they had no suspects. I clicked on the article and saw a picture of the victim. It was a woman I had seen on Hinge. I remembered thinking that she was beautiful and kind-looking. I scrolled down to the comments section and saw a post that made my stomach churn. "I saw this woman with a guy in the park a few weeks ago," the comment read. He was tall and lanky with messy brown hair and intense eyes. They were sitting by the pond, and he seemed to be talking to her about something serious. I thought they looked a little strange, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. I knew, without a doubt, that the guy the commenter had seen was Liam. He had killed that woman, and I had almost been his next victim. I immediately contacted the police and told them everything I knew. They took my statement and said that they would look into it. A few days later, they called me back and told me that they had arrested Liam. They had found evidence linking him to the murder, including a knife with the victim's blood on it. He was charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. I was relieved that he was finally behind bars, but I still couldn't shake the guilt and the fear. I knew that I had been incredibly lucky. I had dodged a bullet, but that woman hadn't, and it was all because of a dating app. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. Liam's intense eyes, his obsession with death, his creepy comments, they were all red flags that I had ignored because I was too eager to find love. I learned a valuable lesson from that experience. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And don't be afraid to walk away, even if it means being alone. It's better to be alone than to be with someone who could potentially harm you. Hinge, for me, will always be synonymous with near death. I still see his face sometimes in my dreams, those intense eyes boring into mine, and I know that I will never forget the day I went on a date with a killer. It started innocently enough, like most things do. I was bored, lonely, and tired of the same old routine. My friends were all coupled up, posting cute couple pics on Instagram, and I couldn't help but feel like I was missing out. So, I did what any sane, single person in the 21st century would do. I downloaded Hinge. I'd used dating apps before, Tinder, Bumble, the whole shebang, but nothing ever really stuck. Either the conversations were shallow, the people were completely different in person, or the whole experience just felt fake. Hinge, with its emphasis on prompts and personality-driven profiles, seemed like it might be different. It claimed to be designed to be deleted, which sounded promising. I spent a solid hour crafting my profile, agonizing over which photos to use and what witty things to say in response to the prompts. I picked pictures that showcased my hobbies, hiking, reading, attempting to cook, and wrote answers that were honest, but still a little mysterious. I wanted to come across as approachable but not desperate, interesting but not intimidating. It was a delicate balancing act. The matches started rolling and almost immediately. I was surprised and honestly, a little flattered. I swiped through the profiles, liking the ones that caught my eye and sending thoughtful comments on the ones that seemed particularly interesting. I actually tried to be genuine, to put some effort into making a connection. That's how I met Alex. His profile was different. Not in a bad way, just unique. His photos weren't the typical gym selfies or group shots with friends. They were more artistic, more introspective. One was a close-up of his hands playing the piano. Another was a landscape shot of a foggy forest, and another was a black and white portrait of him looking off into the distance. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but he had this intense, brooding quality that I found strangely compelling. His prompts were equally intriguing. Instead of the usual generic responses, he wrote about his love for obscure literature, his fascination with philosophy, and his belief that there was more to the world than what we could see with our eyes. He seemed deep, thoughtful, and a little bit mysterious. I sent him a comment on his photo of the foggy forest, asking him where it was taken. He responded almost immediately, and we struck up a conversation. He told me it was a place near his hometown, a place he went to clear his head and connect with nature. He described the feeling of being surrounded by the mist, the silence, the sense of being completely alone in the world. Our conversations continued like that for days. We talked about everything and nothing, delving into topics that I usually avoided with people I barely knew. He was a good listener, asking thoughtful questions and offering insightful observations. He made me feel like I was the only person in the world, like he genuinely cared about what I had to say. I was falling for him hard. After a week of constant messaging, he suggested we meet in person. I was hesitant. I'd been burned before by online dating, and I was afraid of being disappointed. But I couldn't deny that I was curious. I wanted to see if the connection we had online would translate into real life. We agreed to meet for coffee at a small cafe near my apartment. I spent hours getting ready, picking out the perfect outfit, and trying to calm my nerves. I wanted to make a good impression, to show him that I was just as interesting and engaging in person as I was online. He was already there when I arrived. He looked different than he did in his photos, more intense. His eyes were darker, his expression more guarded, but he still had that same brooding quality that had drawn me to him in the first place. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. The conversation flowed easily, just like it had online. He was just as intelligent, just as thoughtful, just as mysterious. I felt like I had known him for years. As the evening wore on, he started to get strange. He asked me personal questions, questions that made me uncomfortable. He wanted to know about my childhood, my fears, my deepest insecurities. He seemed to be trying to get under my skin, to see how far he could push me. I tried to deflect, to change the subject, but he was persistent. He kept probing, pushing, until I felt like I was being interrogated. I started to feel uneasy, like I was trapped in a room with a stranger. When I told him I had to go, he seemed disappointed. He walked me back to my apartment, and as we stood outside my door, he leaned in to kiss me. I hesitated, but I didn't want to be rude. I let him kiss me, but it felt wrong. His lips were cold and dry, and his eyes were wide and unblinking. I quickly said goodnight and rushed inside, locking the door behind me. I leaned against the door, catching my breath, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. Something was off about him. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I didn't want to see him again. The next day, I unmatched him on Hinge and blocked his number. I wanted to put the whole experience behind me, to pretend it never happened, but he wouldn't let me. He started emailing me, using a different email address each time. He wrote about how much he liked me, how he couldn't stop thinking about me, how he knew we were meant to be together. He was obsessed, possessive, and increasingly unhinged. I ignored his emails, deleted them without reading them. I thought if I just ignored him, he would eventually go away. But he didn't. He started showing up outside my apartment building. I would see him standing across the street, watching me. He never said anything, never made a move, just stood there, staring. It was terrifying. I reported him to the police, but they said there was nothing they could do unless he actually threatened me or harmed me. They told me to get a restraining order, but I was afraid that would only escalate things. I was living in a constant state of fear. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything. I was convinced that he was going to hurt me, that he was going to do something terrible. Then, one night, I came home to find my apartment door unlocked. I cautiously pushed it open, my heart pounding in my chest. The apartment was dark and silent. I flicked on the light, and that's when I saw it. Scrawled on my living room wall, in what looked like blood, were the words, "I'm always watching." I screamed. I ran out of the apartment and didn't stop running until I reached my friend's house. I told her everything, and she convinced me to go back to the police. This time, they took me seriously. They dusted the apartment for fingerprints and launched a full investigation. They found evidence that he had been inside my apartment, that he had been stalking me for weeks. They finally arrested him a few days later. He didn't resist, didn't say anything. He just stared at me with those cold, unblinking eyes. I later found out that he had a history of stalking and harassment. He had been doing this to women for years, preying on their vulnerabilities, manipulating them, and terrorizing them. He was a master of disguise, able to present himself as charming and intelligent, while hiding his true nature. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to prison. I testified against him, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I had to relive the whole experience, to face him again, to confront my fears. Even now, years later, I still have nightmares. I still jump at shadows. I still check my locks 3 times before going to bed. I still feel like I'm being watched. But the scariest part, the part that haunts me the most, is realizing how easily I was fooled, how easily I fell for his act, how easily I let him into my life. It was the realization that someone could seem so normal, so interesting, so kind, and yet be so incredibly dangerous. It makes me question everything, trust no one, and constantly look over my shoulder. The internet is vast, and there are people out there who know how to take advantage of it. I will never trust an online person again. I really wish I could unremember the day I met Liam. It's not even like some grand, dramatic tale of physical horror. It's the kind of slow burn, creeping dread kind of story that sticks with you, a dull ache in the back of your mind that you just can't shake. I'd been on Hinge for a few months, mostly as a way to combat the soul-crushing boredom of my new job. I was fresh out of college, working a data entry position in some soulless corporate office park, and Hinge was my way of reminding myself that there was still a world outside of spreadsheets and fluorescent lighting. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to grab a drink with, maybe see a movie. The usual millennial dating app shuffle. Liam's profile wasn't anything extraordinary. Decent pictures, a hiking shot, one with his dog, a blurry one at a concert. His prompts were witty enough, hinting at a dark sense of humor that I usually find appealing. We matched, exchanged a few messages about our shared love for obscure indie bands, and decided to meet up for coffee the following Saturday. Nothing out of the ordinary. The coffee shop was one of those trendy, minimalist places with exposed brick and overpriced lattes. I got there a few minutes early and snagged a table near the window, people watching while I waited. Liam arrived right on time, and my first impression was, well, he looked exactly like his pictures, maybe a little taller. He had kind eyes and a genuine smile, and the conversation flowed easily from the start. We talked about music, movies, our families, our aspirations, all the standard first date stuff. He was intelligent, engaging, and surprisingly self-aware. About an hour into the date, he asked me about my work. I told him about my data entry job, how mind-numbing it was, and how I was desperately searching for something more fulfilling. He listened attentively, nodding sympathetically. Then he said, "You know, I've always been fascinated by data. The way information can be used, manipulated, it's incredibly powerful." I chuckled. Yeah, well, it feels pretty powerless when you're just inputting numbers all day. He smiled, but there was something unsettling in his eyes, a strange intensity that made me slightly uncomfortable. "But even those numbers tell a story," he said. "They reveal patterns, connections, secrets." I brushed it off as him just being quirky and changed the subject. We talked for another hour or so, and by the end of the date, I was genuinely interested in seeing him again. He walked me back to my car, gave me a hug, and said he'd text me later. The next day, I got a text from him, asking if I wanted to go for a hike on Sunday. I said yes. The hike was nice, the conversation was good, and I found myself enjoying his company more and more. He was still a little intense at times, but I chalked it up to him being passionate and intellectual. We went on a few more dates over the next couple of weeks. A movie, a concert, dinner at a cozy Italian place. Each time, I found myself drawn to him, even though there was always this subtle unease simmering beneath the surface. He had this way of looking at me, like he was trying to see something that wasn't there. And he kept bringing up data, information, secrets. One night, we were at my apartment watching a movie. It was late, and we were both getting tired. As I was getting up to turn off the lights, he said, "You know, I did a little research on you." I froze. "What do you mean?" He smiled that unsettling smile again. "Just some casual Googling. I wanted to know more about you." "That's kind of creepy," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Not really," he said. "Everyone Googles everyone these days. I just wanted to see what was out there." He started listing things he had found about me online. My college newspaper articles, my old social media profiles, even my address. It wasn't anything too personal, but the fact that he had gone digging for it made me incredibly uncomfortable. "Liam, that's not okay," I said, my voice rising. "You can't just go around researching people without their permission." He shrugged. "I didn't mean any harm. I was just curious." I told him to leave. He tried to apologize, to explain, but I was too freaked out to listen. I just wanted him gone. After he left, I spent the rest of the night scrubbing my social media profiles, deleting old accounts, and tightening my privacy settings. I felt violated, like he had invaded my personal space without even touching me. The next day, I got a message from him on Hinge, apologizing profusely for his behavior. He said he had been acting out of line and that he understood if I didn't want to see him again. I ignored the message, but then the messages started coming through other channels. Emails, texts to my phone, even handwritten letters slipped under my door. He was begging for forgiveness, promising to change, saying he couldn't live without me. I blocked his number, changed my email address, and installed a security camera in my apartment. I was terrified. I had gone on a few dates with someone who was clearly obsessed with me, someone who was willing to stalk me to get what he wanted. A week went by, and I didn't hear from him. I started to relax, to think that maybe he had finally gotten the message. But then, one morning, I woke up to find something strange on my doorstep. It was a USB drive, wrapped in a piece of paper. On the paper, there was a single word: secrets. I stared at the USB drive, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew, without a doubt, that it was from Liam. But what was on it? What kind of secrets was he talking about? I was tempted to throw it away, to pretend it didn't exist. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know what was on it. Maybe it was evidence of something illegal, something I could take to the police. Or maybe it was just another attempt to manipulate me, to scare me. I took the USB drive inside, plugged it into an old laptop I rarely used, and braced myself. The laptop turned on, and I clicked on the USB drive. There were several folders, each named after a different website or social media platform. I clicked on the first folder, and my blood ran cold. Inside, there were screenshots of my private messages, my browsing history, my search queries, everything I had ever done online. It was like he had been spying on me for months, tracking my every move. I clicked on another folder, and it was even worse. There were pictures of me, taken through my webcam, without my knowledge. Pictures of me sleeping, showering, changing clothes. He had hacked into my computer and was watching me, recording me. I felt sick to my stomach. I ripped the USB drive out of the laptop, threw the laptop against the wall, and started sobbing uncontrollably. I was completely violated, exposed, vulnerable. I called the police, told them everything that had happened. They took the USB drive as evidence and launched an investigation. But Liam was gone. He had disappeared, leaving no trace behind. The police searched for him for months, but they never found him. They told me he had likely fled the state, maybe even the country. They said he was probably a professional stalker, someone who had done this before. I moved to a new city, changed my name, and went into therapy. I still have nightmares about Liam, about his unsettling smile, about his obsession with data and secrets. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if he's still out there, watching me. I haven't used Hinge since that day. I haven't used any dating apps. I'm too afraid to trust anyone, to let anyone get close to me. I wish I could forget what happened that day, but I can't. It's a part of me now, a dark shadow that will always be lurking in the background, a constant reminder of the dangers of online dating, of the dark side of technology, of the fact that you never really know who you're talking to on the other side of the screen. Sometimes, swiping right can lead you down a path you can never come back from. And sometimes, the person you think is just a quirky intellectual is actually a monster hiding in plain sight, waiting to prey on your vulnerabilities. I should have trusted my instincts when his profile said he was fluent in sarcasm. Now, I know what you're thinking. Everyone puts that on their dating profile, right? It's practically a cliché. But something about the way he worded it, the slightly too smug look in his photos, it just gave me a weird feeling. I ignored it. I was bored, swiping late at night, and his photos were conventionally attractive, I guess. He had that kind of ruggedly handsome look, like he spent more time outdoors than I did. He listed hiking and craft beer as interests, which are basically catnip for girls in my city. So I swiped right. Big mistake. His opening line was something about how my profile said I liked indie films, and then he proceeded to list a bunch of incredibly obscure, pretentious movies I'd never even heard of, acting like I was some kind of Philistine for not knowing them. That should have been my first clue to unmatch, but I'm a sucker for a challenge. I foolishly thought I could hold my own in a conversation with this guy. Prove that I wasn't some basic, mainstream movie-watching pleb. So, I responded, playing along, pretending I knew what he was talking about. We chatted for a few days, and it was a constant barrage of backhanded compliments and thinly veiled insults, disguised as humor. He'd say things like, "Oh, you actually have a sense of humor? I was starting to think your profile was just a collection of cliches." Or, "Wow, you're surprisingly intelligent for someone who likes, insert popular band here." It was exhausting, but I kept engaging, partly because I was genuinely curious to see how far he'd take it, and partly because I'm embarrassingly bad at ending conversations. Against my better judgment, we decided to meet for coffee. I convinced myself that maybe he was just awkward over text, that maybe in person he'd be charming and funny, and the sarcasm would actually be endearing. I don't know what I was thinking. I chose a busy cafe in a central location, just in case I needed to make a quick escape. I even prepped a few exit strategies in my head. Fake phone call, sudden illness, urgent family emergency. I was ready for anything. He arrived looking exactly like his pictures, maybe even a little better in person. He was tall, with piercing blue eyes and a jawline that could cut glass. He was wearing a flannel shirt and hiking boots, the stereotypical outdoorsy guy uniform. He smiled when he saw me, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, I had misjudged him. That hope lasted approximately 5 seconds. As soon as we sat down, the sarcasm started flowing, even stronger than it had been online. He immediately started making fun of my outfit, my coffee order, even the way I was sitting. "Are you always this tense?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "You look like you're about to defuse a bomb." I tried to laugh it off, but I could feel my cheeks getting red. The conversation didn't get any better from there. He dominated the entire time, talking about himself and his accomplishments, constantly one-upping everything I said. If I mentioned a book I'd read, he'd tell me about a more obscure, more intellectual book he'd read. If I talked about a hike I'd gone on, he'd brag about scaling some treacherous mountain in the Himalayas. He even managed to turn a simple anecdote about my cat into an opportunity to belittle my pet ownership skills. I was miserable. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to be rude. I kept thinking, maybe it'll get better. Maybe he's just nervous. But it didn't get better. It got worse. About halfway through the coffee date, he started asking me about my job. I work as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm, which isn't exactly the most glamorous or intellectually stimulating career in the world, but it pays the bills and I enjoy it. When I told him what I did, he scoffed. "Graphic design? That's interesting," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "So, you basically just make things look pretty." I tried to explain that there was more to it than that. That graphic design involved problem-solving, creativity, and strategic thinking. But he wasn't listening. He cut me off, launching into a long-winded monologue about the importance of real art and how commercial design was just a soulless pursuit of money. He went on, completely oblivious to the fact that he was insulting my career, my passion, and my livelihood. I finally snapped. "You know what?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I think I'm going to go." He looked genuinely surprised. "What? Why? Are you not having a good time?" "No, I'm not having a good time," I said, standing up. "You've been rude, condescending, and completely dismissive of everything I've said. I should have trusted my instincts when I saw your profile, because you are exactly the kind of person I try to avoid." I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving him sitting there with his mouth hanging open. I felt a surge of relief wash over me as I stepped out into the fresh air. I had finally stood up for myself. I had finally ended the date from hell. But the story doesn't end there. Oh no, it gets worse. A few days later, I received a message from him on Hinge. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was a long, rambling apology, filled with excuses and self-deprecating humor. He claimed he was just socially awkward, and that he didn't mean to come across as insulting. He said he was actually really attracted to me, and that he wanted to give things another try. Against all reason, against all my instincts, I considered it. I told myself that maybe he was genuinely remorseful, that maybe he just needed a second chance. I even confided in a friend, who, thankfully, talked me out of it. "Are you crazy?" she said. "He treated you like garbage. Why would you even consider seeing him again?" She was right, of course. I blocked him on Hinge and tried to forget the whole thing. But he wasn't done yet. A few weeks later, I started noticing strange things happening. I get to work in the morning and find my desk rearranged, my computer turned on, my coffee cup moved to a different spot. I initially dismissed it as forgetfulness or a prank by a coworker, but it kept happening, and it started to feel unsettling. Then, one evening, as I was walking home from work, I noticed someone following me. I glanced back and saw a figure lurking in the shadows, a tall man wearing a flannel shirt and hiking boots. My heart leaped into my throat. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't get a clear look at his face, but the way he moved, the way he held himself, it was him. It had to be him. I ducked into a crowded store, hoping to lose him in the crowd. I stayed there for a long time, pretending to browse, my eyes darting nervously around the room. When I finally emerged, the street was empty. I ran the rest of the way home, my hands shaking, my mind racing. I called the police, but they couldn't do anything without proof. They told me to file a report if anything else happened. I started carrying pepper spray and avoiding walking alone at night. I felt like I was living in a horror movie. The strange occurrences continued for weeks. I'd find cryptic messages written on my car window. My social media accounts were hacked, and I started receiving anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. I was terrified. I was convinced that he was stalking me, that he was trying to scare me, that he was planning something even worse. I eventually moved to a different apartment, changed my phone number, and deactivated all my social media accounts. I haven't seen or heard from him since. But even now, years later, I still get a shiver down my spine whenever I see someone wearing a flannel shirt and hiking boots. I should have trusted my instincts when his profile said he was fluent in sarcasm. I should have unmatched him after his first backhanded compliment. I should have walked out of that coffee date the moment I realized he was a condescending jerk. But I didn't, and I paid the price. I learned a valuable lesson. Never ignore your gut feeling, especially when it comes to online dating. And if someone tells you they're fluent in sarcasm, run the other way. Fast. It's a red flag, a warning sign, a neon-lit billboard screaming, "Danger! Do not engage." Trust me on this one. I learned the hard way. Hinge dating is no joke. Still haunted by the memory. Hinge, the dating app designed to be deleted, was supposed to be a step up from the endless swiping and vapid conversations of Tinder. Or so I thought. I was cautiously optimistic, looking for something real, something beyond the fleeting connections I'd made before. Liam seemed different. His profile was thoughtful, his prompts were witty, and his photos showed a genuine smile. He was a musician, a creative soul. He talked about his love for vinyl records, his passion for songwriting, and his dream of playing in a real band. It was the kind of stuff I actually cared about. We matched, and our conversations flowed easily. He was charming, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asked about my hobbies, my career goals, and my favorite books. It was refreshing. After a week of chatting, he suggested we meet for coffee. A simple, low-pressure first date. I was excited, but a small part of me hesitated. There was something about him, a subtle undercurrent, that made me feel uneasy. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but my gut was telling me to be cautious. He insisted on picking me up, which I initially found sweet. But as the day drew closer, I started to feel more and more anxious. I suggested we meet at the coffee shop instead, but he brushed it off, saying he was already planning his route and it would be easier for him to come get me. I relented, telling myself I was just being paranoid. I sent him my address, feeling a knot of unease tighten in my stomach. The moment he pulled up outside my apartment, I knew I'd made a mistake. His car was a beat-up sedan, older than I expected, with tinted windows and a dented bumper. It wasn't the car itself that bothered me, but the way he parked, angled slightly towards the street, like he was ready to make a quick getaway. He got out of the car, and my apprehension intensified. He was taller than he looked in his photos, with intense, piercing eyes that seemed to bore right through me. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and his handshake was a little too firm, a little too lingering. "Hey," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered from our phone calls. "Ready to go?" I hesitated for a split second, considering making an excuse, but I didn't want to be rude. "Yeah, let's go," I said, forcing a smile. The drive to the coffee shop was awkward. He kept glancing at me, and I could feel his eyes on me even when I looked away. He made small talk, but his questions felt intrusive, like he was trying to gather information. "So, you live alone?" he asked casually. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "Just me and my cat." "No roommates, no boyfriend?" He pressed. "Nope," I said, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "Just me." We arrived at the coffee shop, and I practically leaped out of the car. I needed to be in a public place, surrounded by other people. The coffee shop was bustling, filled with the chatter of conversations and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. It was a welcome contrast to the oppressive atmosphere in Liam's car. We ordered our drinks and found a table in the corner. The conversation was stilted, and I struggled to find common ground. He talked mostly about himself, his music, his struggles, his ex-girlfriends. He seemed to be looking for sympathy, but I couldn't muster any. His stories were rambling and inconsistent, and I started to suspect he was exaggerating or even making things up. After about an hour, I decided I'd had enough. I made an excuse about having to meet a friend, and he didn't protest. He seemed almost relieved. "I'll walk you back to your car," he offered. "No, that's okay," I said quickly. "I need to run some errands. I'll just walk from here." He looked disappointed, but he didn't push it. I said goodbye and practically ran out of the coffee shop. I didn't want to get back in that car with him. I walked quickly, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, convinced he was following me. I made it back to my apartment building and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I peeked through the peephole, and my blood ran cold. Liam was standing across the street, watching my building. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, his eyes fixed on my window. Then, he turned and walked away. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak and groan of the building sent shivers down my spine. I kept the lights on and stayed glued to the window, watching for any sign of him. The next day, I blocked his number and deleted him from Hinge. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that he was just a little awkward and intense. But the feeling of unease lingered. A few days later, I started receiving strange phone calls. The caller ID was blocked, and when I answered, there was only silence. The calls came at all hours of the day and night, often waking me up in the middle of the night. I changed my number, hoping it would stop, but the calls continued, now coming to my new number. It was unnerving, and I felt like I was being watched. One evening, I came home from work and found my apartment door slightly ajar. My heart leaped into my throat. I cautiously pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was a mess. Furniture was overturned, drawers were pulled open, and clothes were scattered everywhere. It was clear someone had been searching for something. I called the police, and they came to investigate. They dusted for fingerprints and took a report, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. "Looks like a simple burglary," the officer said dismissively. "Probably just looking for valuables." But I knew it wasn't a random burglary. This was personal. This was Liam. I started to fear for my safety. I installed a security system, changed the locks, and bought a can of pepper spray. I was constantly on edge, looking over my shoulder, afraid of who might be lurking in the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that Liam was still out there, watching me, waiting for an opportunity. A few weeks later, I received a package in the mail. It was a small, unmarked box. I hesitated to open it, fearing what might be inside. Finally, I gathered my courage and tore it open. Inside, there was a single vinyl record. It was one of my favorite albums, one I had mentioned to Liam during our brief conversation. Attached to the record was a note, scrawled in messy handwriting. "I know what you like." It read, "I'm always watching." I screamed. I ran out of my apartment and didn't stop running until I reached the police station. This time, they took me seriously. They launched an investigation and started tracking Liam. It turned out he had a history of stalking and harassment. He had been arrested before for similar offenses, but he had always managed to slip through the cracks. It took several months, but the police finally caught him. He was arrested and charged with stalking and harassment. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to several years in prison. I testified at his trial, and it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. Seeing him in the courtroom, knowing what he was capable of, filled me with a mixture of fear and anger. After the trial, I moved to a new city, hoping to put the past behind me. But the experience had changed me. I was more cautious, more guarded, and less trusting of strangers. I still use dating apps, but I'm much more careful about who I connect with. I trust my instincts, and I don't ignore red flags. If I hadn't trusted my instincts that day, if I had ignored the subtle warnings, who knows what might have happened? I might not be here today. I learned a valuable lesson. Trust your gut, and don't be afraid to say no. Your safety and well-being are more important than being polite or avoiding awkwardness. And never underestimate the power of a bad Hinge date to turn your life into a real-life horror story. Years later, the memory of Liam still lingers, a dark shadow in the back of my mind. But I refuse to let him define me. I'm a survivor, and I'm stronger than ever. And I'll never forget the importance of trusting my instincts, no matter how subtle they may be. I wish someone had warned me about Hinge's algorithm, or maybe more accurately, the kind of people that algorithms seem to attract to my profile. I'd always considered myself a fairly normal person, not drop-dead gorgeous, but presentable. I had a good job, a decent social life, and a solid group of friends. After a particularly brutal breakup, my friends practically forced me onto Hinge, claiming it was the relationship app, the sophisticated alternative to the endless swiping of Tinder. I resisted at first, but the loneliness eventually got to me, and I begrudgingly created a profile. I put some thought into my prompts, chose flattering pictures, and tried to project an image of someone who was both fun and intelligent. Within a few days, I started getting matches. Standard stuff mostly. Guys with generic profiles, predictable interests, and the same tired opening lines. I weeded through them, had a few lukewarm conversations, and even went on a couple of dates that were ultimately forgettable. Then came Ethan. His profile was different. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but he had these piercing blue eyes and a thoughtful expression that drew me in. His prompts were witty and insightful, revealing a sense of humor and a surprising depth of understanding. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, asking questions that went beyond the usual surface-level chatter. We talked about our favorite books, our travel dreams, and our biggest fears. It felt easy, refreshing. We decided to meet for coffee. He suggested a small, independent bookstore cafe downtown. When I arrived, he was already there, waiting for me with a warm smile. In person, he was even more captivating. He was articulate, passionate, and genuinely engaging. We spent hours talking, lost in conversation, oblivious to the other patrons around us. The date felt like something out of a movie. I was completely smitten. Things moved quickly after that. We went on a second date, then a third. We started spending weekends together, exploring the city, cooking meals, and just enjoying each other's company. He was attentive, supportive, and incredibly romantic. He wrote me handwritten letters, surprised me with thoughtful gifts, and made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. I fell hard, and I fell fast. Looking back, there were red flags, subtle inconsistencies, odd behaviors, and moments where he seemed off. But I was so caught up in the whirlwind romance that I dismissed them, chalking them up to quirks or insecurities. He was intensely private about his past, deflecting questions about his family and previous relationships. He was also incredibly jealous, constantly checking in on me, questioning my whereabouts, and expressing suspicion about my male friends. At the time, I interpreted it as a sign of his deep affection, a testament to how much he cared about me. The first real crack appeared during a weekend trip to a cabin in the woods. We were supposed to be celebrating our 1-month anniversary, a romantic getaway to escape the city and reconnect with nature. But the atmosphere shifted almost as soon as we arrived. He became withdrawn, irritable, and strangely paranoid. He kept staring out the windows, as if expecting someone to appear. He insisted on keeping all the doors and windows locked, even though it was a beautiful day outside. That night, I woke up to find him standing over me, staring down at me with an unreadable expression on his face. When I asked him what he was doing, he simply said he was making sure I was safe. I tried to laugh it off, but his eyes were cold and distant. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, things escalated. He accused me of flirting with the waiter at the local diner, even though I had barely spoken to him. He became increasingly agitated, his voice rising with each accusation. I tried to reason with him, to reassure him that his fears were unfounded, but he wouldn't listen. He seemed convinced that I was lying, that I was hiding something from him. The argument escalated into a full-blown screaming match. He started pacing around the cabin, ranting about trust and betrayal. He grabbed my phone and started scrolling through my contacts, demanding to know who each person was. I tried to grab it back, but he pushed me away, his grip tightening on my wrist. That was the first time he physically hurt me. It wasn't a deliberate blow, but it was enough to shock me into silence. I stared at him, tears streaming down my face, unable to comprehend what was happening. The man I thought I knew, the man who had showered me with love and affection, had transformed into someone I didn't recognize. He immediately apologized, his voice filled with remorse. He swore he didn't mean to hurt me, that he was just scared of losing me. He begged for forgiveness, promising it would never happen again. I wanted to believe him, but the fear in my heart was overwhelming. I insisted on leaving immediately. He drove me back to the city in silence, his face etched with guilt and shame. I didn't say a word, paralyzed by fear and confusion. When we arrived at my apartment, he tried to hug me, but I flinched away. I told him it was over, that I couldn't see him anymore. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I spent the next few weeks in a state of shock. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't stop replaying the events of that weekend in my head. I felt betrayed, violated, and utterly foolish. How could I have been so blind? How could I have fallen for someone who was capable of such violence? I confided in my friends, who were horrified by what had happened. They urged me to go to the police, but I hesitated. I was scared of the repercussions, scared of the publicity, and scared of facing Ethan again. I also felt a strange sense of shame, as if I was somehow responsible for what had happened. Instead, I decided to block him on all social media platforms and cut off all contact. I changed my phone number, moved to a new apartment, and tried to rebuild my life. I started therapy, which helped me process the trauma and understand the warning signs I had missed. But the experience left a lasting scar. I became incredibly wary of dating, terrified of repeating the same mistake. I deleted Hinge and vowed never to use a dating app again. I realized that the algorithm, while designed to connect people with similar interests, couldn't screen out the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. It couldn't detect the manipulative tendencies, the underlying rage, or the potential for violence. It took me a long time to trust again, to open myself up to the possibility of love. I eventually met someone new, someone who was kind, patient, and genuinely respectful. But even now, years later, I still carry the weight of that experience with me. I still have moments of doubt, moments of fear, and moments where I question my own judgment. I wish someone had warned me about the dark side of Hinge, about the predators who lurk behind carefully crafted profiles, waiting to prey on vulnerable hearts. I wish someone had told me to trust my instincts, to pay attention to the subtle red flags, and to prioritize my safety above all else. The truth is, dating apps can be dangerous. They can create a false sense of intimacy, allowing people to present idealized versions of themselves. They can also attract individuals who are looking to exploit, manipulate, or harm others. It's important to be aware of these risks and to take steps to protect yourself. If you choose to use a dating app, do your research. Be cautious about sharing personal information. Meet in public places for your first few dates. Trust your gut and don't ignore red flags. And most importantly, remember that you deserve to be treated with respect, kindness, and compassion. Don't settle for anything less. I wish someone had warned me, but now I'm warning you. Be careful out there. The algorithm can't protect you from everything. I hate dating apps. I really do. I think they're inherently superficial, designed to exploit our insecurities, and generally just a breeding ground for disappointment. But, like a lot of people, I found myself swiping through profiles on Hinge one particularly lonely Friday night a few months ago. I'd been single for a while, and the thought of spending another weekend binge-watching Netflix in my pajamas was making me feel even worse. Hinge always felt a little less awful than the other apps. The whole designed to be deleted tagline was a nice sentiment, at least. And the prompts, while often leading to predictable answers, at least forced people to put a little more thought into their profiles than just a carefully curated selection of selfies. That's how I came across Liam's profile. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something intriguing about him. His photos weren't overly posed or filtered, and he had this warm, genuine smile that seemed to reach his eyes. His prompts were funny and thoughtful, revealing a quick wit and a surprising vulnerability. One of his answers was, "I'm overly competitive about trivia night. Prepare to lose." I laughed out loud, and something about his profile just clicked with me. I sent him a message responding to his trivia comment, and to my surprise, he replied almost immediately. We started chatting back and forth, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He was smart, funny, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about books, movies, our jobs, our families, and everything in between. He was charming, but not overly flirtatious, and he had this way of making me feel comfortable and seen. After a few days of chatting, we decided to meet up for coffee. I was nervous, of course, but also genuinely excited. I hadn't felt this way about someone I'd met online in a long time. The coffee date went even better than I could have hoped. Liam was just as charming and funny in person as he was online. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. There was a real connection between us, a spark that I hadn't felt with anyone in years. We started seeing each other regularly after that. We went to movies, concerts, museums, and even took a weekend trip to the coast. He was always thoughtful and considerate, and he made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. I was falling hard for him, and I didn't care. He introduced me to his friends, who were all incredibly welcoming and kind. He met my family, and they loved him instantly. Everything seemed perfect, almost too good to be true. Looking back, there were subtle red flags that I ignored, little inconsistencies in his stories, moments where he seemed to be holding back. But I was so caught up in the whirlwind romance that I didn't want to see them. I was so desperate for things to work out that I convinced myself that everything was fine. One night, we were at his apartment, watching a movie and cuddling on the couch. He got up to get us some water, and I decided to snoop through his bookshelf. I know it was wrong, but I was curious. I wanted to know more about him, to understand what made him tick. I found a worn leather-bound journal tucked away on the bottom shelf. The cover was blank, and there was no title. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The first few pages were filled with what seemed like random notes and observations. There were quotes from books, lyrics from songs, and snippets of conversations. But as I flipped through the pages, the writing became more erratic, more disturbing. There were descriptions of violent fantasies, detailed plans for revenge against people who had wronged him, and disturbing drawings of women with their faces crossed out. The handwriting was different too, scratchier and more agitated than the neat, cursive script he used in his texts. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't the man I thought I knew. This was someone else entirely, someone dark and twisted. I quickly closed the journal and put it back on the shelf, my hands shaking. Liam walked back into the room with the water bottles, and I tried to act normal, but my heart was pounding in my chest. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing my unease. "Yeah, fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just admiring your bookshelf." He smiled back, but his eyes seemed to narrow slightly, as if he didn't quite believe me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the images from the journal in my mind, trying to reconcile them with the man I thought I loved. I was terrified, but I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just confront him. What if he was dangerous? What if he tried to hurt me? The next day, I decided to do some research. I started by Googling his name, something I probably should have done before getting so involved with him. The first few results were innocuous enough. His LinkedIn profile, his Facebook page, a few articles he had written for a local magazine. But then I stumbled upon a news article from a few years ago. It was about a missing woman, a young college student who had disappeared without a trace. Her name was Sarah, and she had been dating a man named Liam. The article mentioned that Liam had been questioned by the police, but he had an alibi and was never charged. The case was still unsolved. My blood ran cold. I clicked on another article, and then another and another. Each one painted a clearer picture of Liam's dark past. He had a history of violence, a pattern of dating young women, and then disappearing from their lives. He had been suspected of involvement in several other missing persons cases, but there was never enough evidence to convict him. I realized then that I was in danger. I had been so blinded by my own loneliness and desire for connection that I had ignored all the warning signs. I had let a potentially dangerous man into my life, and now I didn't know how to get rid of him. I spent the next few days living in a state of constant anxiety. I avoided Liam as much as possible, making excuses about work and family obligations. I changed my locks, installed a security system, and told my friends and family about my suspicions. I felt like I was living in a horror movie, waiting for the killer to strike. One evening, Liam called me, sounding agitated. "Hey, what's going on? You've been avoiding me," he said. "Is everything okay?" "I'm fine," I lied, my voice trembling. "Just been really busy." "I miss you," he said, his voice softening. "Can I come over tonight? We can watch a movie, just like old times." I hesitated. I knew I shouldn't let him come over, but I was afraid of what he might do if I refused. "Okay," I said finally, my voice barely a whisper, "but just for a little while. I have to get up early tomorrow." As soon as I hung up the phone, I called the police. I told them everything, about the journal, the news articles, my fears for my safety. They promised to send someone over to my apartment to keep an eye on things. Liam arrived a few hours later, carrying a bag of popcorn and a DVD. He seemed nervous, his eyes darting around the room. We sat on the couch and started watching the movie, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing at the door, waiting for the police to arrive. After about an hour, Liam reached over and took my hand. His touch felt cold and clammy. "I have something to tell you," he said, his voice low and serious. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew this was it. This was the moment everything would change. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He leaned closer to me, his eyes fixed on mine. "I know you've been snooping," he whispered. "I know you read my journal." I didn't say anything. I just stared at him, frozen with fear. "Don't be scared," he said, his voice soothing. "I would never hurt you. I just wanted you to know the real me, the dark side that I keep hidden from the world." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver knife. My breath caught in my throat. "See, this is the part of me that everyone's afraid of," he said, running his thumb along the blade. "But you're not afraid, are you?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "Good," he said, smiling, "because I need someone who understands me, someone who accepts me for who I truly am." He raised the knife, and I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact. But then, I heard a loud crash, and the door burst open. 2 police officers stormed into the room, their guns drawn. "Police! Drop the weapon!" they shouted. Liam froze, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at me, then back at the police, and then slowly lowered the knife to the floor. They arrested him without incident. As they let him out of the apartment, he turned to me and smiled. "I'll be back," he said. I didn't sleep for weeks after that. I moved to a new city, changed my name, and started therapy. I'm still haunted by what happened, by the realization that I had come so close to becoming another statistic, another missing person. I hate dating apps even more now. I know not everyone on them is a monster, but the experience has scarred me. I'm terrified of trusting anyone again, of letting someone get close enough to hurt me. I didn't realize the danger I was in until I opened that journal. That's the terrifying thing about people like Liam. They seem so normal, so charming, so safe. But behind the facade, there's a darkness that can consume you if you're not careful. Okay, here's the story. I've tried to make it fit your specific request and follow all the instructions. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. I really should have. But like an idiot, I ignored them, blinded by a combination of loneliness, boredom, and the frankly addictive dopamine rush of getting a match on Hinge. I was fresh out of a long-term relationship, the kind where you think you're going to get married and spend the rest of your life together, only to have it implode in a messy, tear-soaked heap. I was reeling, unsure of who I was outside of that relationship, and desperately seeking validation. Hinge, with its carefully curated profiles and its emphasis on relationships, seemed like the perfect solution. My profile was pretty standard. A few flattering photos, a witty bio, and prompts designed to showcase my personality. I got a decent amount of matches, mostly guys who were perfectly nice, but didn't really spark my interest. Then I saw Liam's profile. He was handsome in a rugged, outdoorsy kind of way, with piercing blue eyes and a charmingly crooked smile. His prompts were thoughtful and insightful, suggesting a depth that I found incredibly appealing. One prompt, "My simple pleasures," read, "Lost in a good book, hiking in the mountains, and the smell of rain on dry earth." I swooned. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He was intelligent, funny, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asked about my interests, my dreams, my fears, the kind of questions that made me feel seen and understood. He even seemed to understand my dry sarcasm. After a week of constant messaging, we decided to meet for a date. He suggested a cozy little bookstore cafe in my neighborhood, which I thought was a perfect choice. The date started off great. Liam was just as charming in person as he was online. We talked for hours about books, movies, travel, and everything in between. He was attentive and engaging, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. But then, as the evening wore on, things started to get a little off. He began steering the conversation towards more esoteric topics, conspiracy theories, ancient civilizations, and the power of the human mind. He talked about how society was being controlled by shadowy forces and how we needed to awaken to the truth. I tried to brush it off, figuring he was just passionate about his interests. But then he started talking about his research. He claimed to be working on a groundbreaking study of the subconscious mind and how it could be used to unlock hidden abilities. He said he needed someone to help him with his research, someone who was open-minded and willing to explore the unknown. He looked directly into my eyes and said, "I need someone who's not afraid to dive deep into the unknown." My skin crawled. I chalked it up to nerves, but the alarms were slowly sounding off. I politely declined, saying that I was too busy with work and other commitments. He seemed disappointed, but didn't push it. The rest of the date was uneventful, and we said goodbye with a casual hug. I went home feeling a little unsettled, but I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. He was just a little eccentric, right? We continued to message each other over the next few days. He still seemed interested, but his messages were becoming increasingly strange. He sent me articles about mind control, alien abductions, and the coming apocalypse. He kept asking me if I had experienced any unexplained phenomena in my life. I started ignoring his messages, hoping he would get the hint. But then he started calling me. At first, it was just once or twice a day. But then it escalated, until he was calling me multiple times an hour. I blocked his number, but he started calling from different numbers. I felt like I was being stalked. One night, I was walking home from work when I saw him standing across the street. He was just standing there, staring at me, with a strange, unsettling smile on his face. I froze, terrified. He started walking towards me, and I panicked. I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached my apartment building. I barricaded myself inside my apartment, terrified that he would try to break in. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak and groan of the building sent shivers down my spine. The next morning, I went to the police and filed a restraining order. They took my report seriously, but they said there wasn't much they could do unless he actually threatened me or harmed me. I started taking self-defense classes. I changed my phone number and email address. I even considered moving to a different city. I was living in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, wondering if he was watching me. Weeks passed, and I didn't see or hear from Liam. I started to relax, thinking that maybe he had finally given up. But then, one evening, I received a package in the mail. It was a small, unmarked box. I hesitated to open it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside the box was a single object, a smooth, gray stone. I didn't recognize it, but it felt strangely familiar. As I held it in my hand, I started to feel dizzy and disoriented. My vision blurred, and I felt like I was falling into a dark abyss. Then, I heard a voice in my head. It was Liam's voice, but it was distorted and amplified, like it was coming from a loudspeaker. "You cannot escape the truth," the voice boomed. "Join me, and we will transcend this reality." I squeezed my eyes shut and dropped the stone, screaming. The dizziness subsided, and my vision cleared. I stared at the stone, lying harmlessly on the floor. I didn't touch it again. I called the police again, telling them about the package and the voice I had heard. They took the stone into evidence, but they said it was unlikely they would be able to trace it back to Liam. They suggested I see a therapist. I started seeing a therapist, and it helped me to process what had happened. I realized that I had been vulnerable and that Liam had preyed on my insecurities. I learned to set boundaries and to trust my instincts. I eventually started dating again, but I was much more cautious. I did thorough background checks on potential partners and made sure to meet them in public places for the first few dates. I never heard from Liam again, but I'll never forget the experience. It taught me a valuable lesson about the dangers of online dating and the importance of trusting my gut. Looking back, the warning signs were there all along. I just chose to ignore them. Don't do what I did. I always thought those internet horror stories were total BS, right? Like some bored dude just making stuff up for kicks. I'd read the Reddit threads, the creepypastas, the BuzzFeed articles about dating app nightmares, and I'd roll my eyes. Yeah, right. I'd think. People are so dramatic. I've always been a pretty skeptical person, pretty grounded. I need to see it to believe it. Until it happened to me. It started innocently enough. I was single, bored, and living in a new city where I didn't know anyone. Hinge seemed like a decent option, less hookup-oriented than Tinder, more curated than Bumble. I made a profile, answered the prompts, chose some flattering photos, and started swiping. Or, well, liking, since that's how Hinge works. I matched with a guy named Alex. He seemed normal. Actually, scratch that. He seemed perfect. He was cute, not ridiculously handsome, but definitely my type. Dark hair, kind eyes, a good smile. He had a good job, according to his profile. He liked hiking, reading, and trying new restaurants, all things I was into. He even had a rescue dog, which was a huge plus in my book. His prompts were thoughtful and funny. He seemed like someone I could actually connect with. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed easily. He asked me about my move, my job, my hobbies. He shared stories about his life, his friends, his dog. We had a lot in common, or so it seemed. I was cautiously optimistic. Maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found someone worth dating in this godforsaken city. After a week or so of texting, we decided to meet up for coffee. The date went great. He was just as charming and funny in person as he was online. We talked for hours, laughing and joking. There were no awkward silences, no red flags. He even paid for my coffee, which I always appreciate. We went on a second date a few days later, then a third. We went to a concert, a museum, and a farmer's market. We even cooked dinner together at my apartment one night. Everything felt so natural, so easy. I was starting to fall for him. Hard. Then things started to get weird. Subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. He started asking me really specific questions about my daily routine. What time I left for work, what route I took, who I interacted with. He wanted to know every detail of my life. At first, I just thought he was being attentive, showing genuine interest. But the questions kept coming, and they became increasingly intrusive. He also started showing up at places I frequented, without me knowing he was going to be there. He'd happen to be at my favorite coffee shop when I went to grab a latte before work. He'd surprise me at the park when I was walking my dog. He said it was just a coincidence, that he liked those places too. But it felt too calculated, too frequent to be random. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was being paranoid. But the feeling of unease kept growing. I started feeling like I was being watched, like someone was always keeping an eye on me. One night, I was working late at the office. I was the only one left on my floor. The building was eerily quiet. I was so focused on my work that I didn't notice the time passing. When I finally looked up, it was almost midnight. I packed up my things and headed for the elevator. As I waited for it to arrive, I heard a noise behind me, a soft, shuffling sound. I turned around, but there was no one there. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling slightly. Silence. I dismissed it as my imagination and stepped into the elevator when it finally arrived. As the doors closed, I saw a figure standing in the hallway. It was too dark to make out any details, but I could tell it was a man. He was just standing there, motionless, staring at the elevator. The doors closed, and I was alone in the elevator. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I felt a shiver run down my spine. When I got home, I checked all the locks on my doors and windows. I turned on all the lights. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was inside my apartment. I tried to call Alex, but he didn't answer. I left him a voicemail, telling him I was scared and asking him to call me back. But he never did. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, listening to every creak and groan of the building. Every shadow seemed to move. Every noise seemed amplified. I was convinced that someone was going to break in. The next day, I decided to do some research. I Googled Alex's name. Nothing. No social media profiles. No online presence whatsoever. It was like he didn't exist. That's when I started to panic. I realized I knew nothing about this man. I didn't know his last name, his address, his family. I had no way of finding him if something happened. I went back to Hinge and tried to find his profile, but it was gone. He had unmatched me. I felt sick to my stomach. I knew something was terribly wrong. I decided to confide in my best friend, Sarah. I told her everything that had been happening, from the intrusive questions to the strange coincidences to the figure in the hallway. Sarah was understandably concerned. She urged me to go to the police, but I hesitated. I didn't have any concrete evidence, just a series of unsettling events. I was afraid they wouldn't take me seriously. Instead, Sarah suggested we do some investigating on our own. We started by driving past the address Alex had given me for his apartment. It was a vacant lot, just an empty field with overgrown weeds. That's when I knew for sure that I was in serious danger. We spent the next few days trying to track Alex down. We checked public records, searched online databases, even hired a private investigator. But we found nothing. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, the strange occurrences continued. I started receiving anonymous phone calls. When I answered, there was just silence on the other end. I found a note on my car one morning that read, "I am watching you." I started seeing the same dark figure lurking in the shadows whenever I went out. I was terrified. I knew I had to do something before it was too late. Finally, I decided to go to the police. This time, I had more to show them. The note, the phone records, the address that didn't exist. The police took my report seriously and launched an investigation. They put a surveillance team on my apartment and started digging into Alex's background. A few days later, they called me with an update. They had identified Alex. His real name was David Miller, and he had a long history of stalking and harassing women. He had been arrested multiple times for similar offenses, but he always managed to get away with it. The police had been tracking him for weeks, but he had been incredibly careful, covering his tracks and avoiding detection. They suspected he was planning something big, something dangerous. They told me to stay in my apartment and not to go anywhere without police protection. They were confident they would catch him soon. But David was one step ahead of them. That night, I was awakened by a loud crash. I jumped out of bed and grabbed my phone. As I dialed 911, I heard someone kicking down my door. I screamed and ran into my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I could hear David shouting my name, his voice filled with rage. He started banging on the door, trying to break it down. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I looked around the room, desperately searching for a weapon. All I could find was a heavy glass vase. I grabbed the vase and waited behind the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The door finally splintered and crashed open. David stood in the doorway, his eyes wild and his face contorted with anger. He lunged at me, but I was ready. I swung the vase with all my might, hitting him in the head. He stumbled backward, clutching his head. I didn't wait. I ran past him and out of the apartment, screaming for help. The police arrived within minutes and apprehended David. He was taken into custody and charged with stalking, harassment, and attempted assault. I was safe, but the experience had changed me forever. I learned a valuable lesson that day. Not everyone is who they seem online. It is easy to create a false persona, to hide behind a screen and manipulate others. I used to think those dating app horror stories were made up. Now I know they are all too real. I still use Hinge cautiously, because honestly it is hard to meet people, but I will always be extra wary of people I match with online and make sure they are real. I will also be sure to always tell people where I am going. This made me realize that you never know what someone is capable of. Okay, so, I'm not usually one for dating apps. The whole swiping thing always felt a little clinical, you know? Like I was picking out a new toaster oven or something. But I was bored, and a couple of friends swore Hinge was different. It's for relationships, they said. More curated, they said. You actually fill out a profile. So fine, I gave it a shot. I'm still paying for it. I matched with this guy, Liam, pretty quickly. His profile was intriguing. He had these intense, almost brooding photos, all black and white, very artsy. One was of him staring out a rainy window. Another was of him reading a book in a dimly lit coffee shop. He wrote that he was searching for someone to share quiet moments with, and that he appreciated the beauty in the mundane. It was all very cerebral. The first red flag, looking back, was probably that he didn't have any pictures with other people. Like zero. No friends, no family, nothing. It just struck me as a little odd, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just private. My naive self thought. I was so wrong. The red flags were being waved at me, like people who need help, and I was the fool to help him, or at least try. But again, looking back, our conversations were different. He didn't do the usual small talk. He'd ask these really deep, probing questions about my fears, my regrets, my darkest secrets. It felt like he was trying to get to know me on a level that was way too intense for someone I'd just met online. But I was drawn to it. I've always been a sucker for a good conversation, and Liam seemed to have an endless supply of them. He had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world when he was talking to me. He'd listen intently to everything I said, hanging on every word, and then he'd respond with these thoughtful, insightful comments that made me feel like he truly understood me. It was intoxicating. We talked for a couple of weeks before we finally decided to meet up. He suggested this obscure little bookstore cafe downtown. It was the kind of place that felt like it had been transported from another era. All creaky wooden floors, dusty shelves, and the aroma of old paper and strong coffee. It was perfect. Liam was even more intense in person. He was tall and thin, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. He wore a long, dark coat, even though it was a warm day, and he spoke in a low, deliberate voice that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. The conversation was amazing. We talked about everything: books, movies, philosophy, life, death. He had this way of framing things that made me see the world in a whole new light. I was completely captivated. This was too good to be true. But there were also these little things that bothered me. He kept staring at me, like he was trying to memorize every detail of my face. He asked me a lot of questions about my routine, where I lived, where I worked, what time I usually got home. Again, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just trying to get to know me, I thought. He also had this habit of contradicting himself. He'd say one thing, and then, a few minutes later, he'd say the exact opposite. It was like he was testing me, trying to see how I'd react. A red flag. He also told me he thought I was unique, like no one before me. After a couple of hours, he suggested we go for a walk. It was getting dark, but I was having such a good time that I didn't want the night to end. We walked through the city streets, talking and laughing. But then, he started to steer me down these dark, deserted alleys. I started to feel a little uneasy. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Just exploring," he said, with a strange smile. I didn't like it. "I think I should get going," I said, turning to walk back the way we came. But he grabbed my arm. "Don't go," he said, his voice suddenly hard. "I'm not done with you yet." I pulled my arm away. "I have to go," I said, my voice trembling. He didn't try to stop me, but he stood there, watching me as I walked away, his eyes burning into my back. I swear I could feel his stare digging into me. I ran all the way home, locked my doors, and didn't sleep a wink that night. I keep thinking about what he said. "I am not done with you yet." The next day, I blocked Liam on Hinge and tried to forget about the whole thing. But he kept finding ways to contact me. He'd create new profiles on Hinge, using different names and pictures, but I always knew it was him. He'd send me these cryptic messages, these unsettling, unnerving, disturbing messages. "I'm watching you," one message said. "I know where you live," said another. I was terrified. I changed my phone number, my email address, everything. I even considered moving. I was so scared to be around him, or even be near the same vicinity as him. But then, things took an even weirder turn. I started receiving packages in the mail. They were always anonymous, with no return address. Inside, there were strange gifts: a single red rose, a handwritten poem, a photograph of me sleeping in my bed. It was always things that only he would have known, or things that only he could have gotten access to. I went to the police, but they said there was nothing they could do. He hadn't actually threatened me, and they couldn't prove that he was the one sending the packages. They asked me if I had known him for a long time, or if I was really close to him. They told me there wasn't enough evidence. I felt helpless. I was being stalked, terrorized, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I became a prisoner in my own home, afraid to go out, afraid to answer the phone, afraid to even look out the window. Then one night, I woke up to a noise downstairs. I crept out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest, and peered over the railing. There was a figure standing in my living room, silhouetted by the moonlight. It was Liam. He was standing there, staring up at me, a strange smile on his face. "Hello," he said, his voice soft and menacing. I screamed. I ran back to my bedroom, locked the door, and called 911. But by the time the police arrived, Liam was gone. Again. I was a mess. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even think straight. I was convinced that Liam was going to kill me. I was paralyzed by fear. This was all my fault, and the consequences are going to be bad. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew I couldn't rely on the police to protect me. I had to protect myself. I bought a gun. I learned how to use it. And I waited. I waited for Liam to come back. It wasn't long before he did. One night, I heard a noise outside my window. I grabbed my gun and crept to the window. There he was, standing in my yard, staring up at my house. I threw open the window and pointed the gun at him. "Get off my property." I screamed. He didn't move. He just stood there, smiling. "I told you. I'm not done with you yet," he said. I pulled the trigger. The gun recoiled in my hand, and Liam fell to the ground. I stood there, staring at his lifeless body, the gun still clutched in my hand. I didn't feel anything. No remorse, no guilt, no fear. Just emptiness. I called the police and told them what happened. They came and took Liam's body away. They asked me a lot of questions, but I didn't answer them. I just stared straight ahead, my mind blank. They took me to jail. I'm still here, waiting for my trial. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I don't know if I'll be convicted of murder or if I'll be acquitted on the grounds of self-defense. All I know is that Liam is gone. He can't hurt me anymore. I'm not proud of what I did, but I did what I had to do to protect myself. And if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't hesitate for a second. The red flags were there, all along. The intense photos, the probing questions, the contradictions, the stalking, the gifts. I ignored them all. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could fix him. I was wrong. Now I'm paying the price. So yeah, Hinge. It's not just for relationships. It's also for stalkers, psychopaths, and murderers. Be careful out there. You never know who you're going to match with. Looking back, all the red flags were there. I just didn't want to see them. I wanted it to be what I was looking for so badly that I ignored every warning sign. And now I am going to spend my life behind bars, all because I was lonely and downloaded Hinge. I wish I could erase it all. The profile, the match, the messages, the whole damn thing. Hinge. They call it the app designed to be deleted. More like the app designed to unleash a personal hell I'm still struggling to escape. I was fresh out of a brutal breakup, feeling lost and desperately lonely. My friends, bless their hearts, kept telling me to get back out there. So, reluctantly, I downloaded Hinge. Swiped through the usual suspects, gym selfies, travel pics, guys holding fish. Why is that a thing? Most profiles were instantly forgettable. Then I saw Liam. He was different. His photos weren't overly posed. One showed him hiking in the mountains, another playing guitar, another laughing with friends at a bonfire. His prompts were thoughtful, funny even. My simple pleasures, rainy days, old books, and a good cup of coffee. I'm looking for someone who can tolerate my terrible puns. He seemed normal, refreshingly so. We matched. The initial messages were easy, lighthearted. We talked about our favorite books, hiking trails, and shared a mutual love for cheesy 80s movies. There was a natural flow to the conversation, a spark I hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't pushy, didn't send creepy messages, just seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a week of chatting, he suggested we meet for coffee. I hesitated. I was still raw from the breakup, scared of getting hurt again. But something about Liam felt safe. I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. He was even more attractive in person. Tall, with kind eyes and a disarming smile. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. The conversation flowed as easily as it had online. He was funny, intelligent, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. I felt myself relaxing, letting my guard down. It was the first time in months I'd felt hopeful. We went on a few more dates. A picnic in the park, a concert, a cozy night in watching movies. Each time, I felt myself falling harder. He was everything I thought I wanted: kind, funny, intelligent, and genuinely caring. He seemed too good to be true. Maybe that should have been my first clue. Then, about a month in, things started to shift. Subtle things at first. He started texting less frequently, taking longer to respond. He'd cancel plans at the last minute, citing work or family emergencies. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was being paranoid, that I was projecting my past relationship baggage onto him. But the feeling of unease persisted. One Saturday, we were supposed to go hiking. I was excited. It was a beautiful day, and I was looking forward to spending time with him in nature. He called me an hour before we were supposed to leave. His voice strained. He said he had a family emergency and had to cancel. I was disappointed but understanding. Family comes first, I told myself. I spent the day alone, trying to distract myself. That evening, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw it. A picture posted by one of my friends. It was a group photo from a party. And there, in the background, laughing and talking to a group of girls, was Liam. He hadn't had a family emergency. He'd lied. My stomach dropped. The feeling of betrayal was immediate and visceral. I confronted him the next day. He denied it at first, said the picture must be old, that it wasn't him. But I pressed him, showed him the photo, pointed out the distinctive shirt he was wearing. He finally cracked, admitted he'd lied, that he hadn't wanted to hurt my feelings. He said he wasn't ready for a serious relationship, that he was still dealing with his own issues. I was furious, hurt, disappointed. I ended things right then and there. I thought that was the end of it, that I'd dodged a bullet, learned a valuable lesson about trusting too easily. I was wrong. A week later, I started receiving strange messages on social media. Anonymous accounts, sending me vague threats and insults. At first, I ignored them, dismissed them as trolls. But they kept coming, growing more frequent and more disturbing. They knew things about me, details about my life, my friends, my family. Things I hadn't shared with Liam. I started to get scared. I changed my passwords, tightened my privacy settings, blocked the anonymous accounts. But they kept finding me. Then, the phone call started. Unlisted numbers, calling at all hours of the night. When I answered, there was only silence. Heavy breathing on the other end of the line. I blocked the numbers, but they kept calling from different ones. I was living in a constant state of anxiety, afraid to answer my phone, afraid to leave my apartment. I went to the police. They took my statement, said they'd investigate, but there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. I felt helpless, alone, paralyzed by fear. One night, I woke up to a noise outside my window, a scratching sound. I peered through the blinds. There, standing on the sidewalk, staring up at my window, was Liam. He was holding a bouquet of flowers. He looked different. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt. He had a strange, unsettling smile on his face. I slammed the blinds shut, my heart pounding. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found a note taped to my door. Handwritten. The handwriting was familiar. It was Liam's. "I'm sorry," it read. "I just want you to understand." I called the police again. They came and took another statement, said they'd keep an eye on things. But I knew that wasn't enough. I was terrified. I started carrying pepper spray with me everywhere I went. I avoided going out alone. I felt like I was being watched, followed. I was a prisoner in my own life. Then, a few weeks later, it happened. I was walking home from work one evening. It was dark. I felt that familiar feeling of being watched. I quickened my pace, clutched my pepper spray. Suddenly, someone grabbed me from behind. A hand clamped over my mouth. I struggled, kicked, screamed. But it was no use. He was too strong. He dragged me into a dark alley. I saw his face. It was Liam. His eyes were wild, unfocused. He was muttering something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words. I fought with all my strength, but he overpowered me. He pushed me to the ground. I saw the knife in his hand. Everything after that is a blur. A haze of pain, fear, and terror. I remember screaming, begging him to stop. I remember the cold steel of the knife. I remember the darkness closing in. I woke up in the hospital, bandaged, bruised, broken. I was lucky to be alive. Liam had been arrested. He was charged with attempted murder. I later learned that he had a long history of mental illness. He had been stalking and harassing other women for years. Hinge, the app designed to be deleted. It almost deleted me. The physical wounds have healed, but the emotional scars run deep. I still have nightmares. I still jump at sudden noises. I'm still afraid to trust. I wish I could forget what happened that day. I wish I could erase Liam from my memory. But I can't. He's a permanent fixture in my life now. A constant reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface. A reminder that sometimes the things that seem too good to be true are. I deleted Hinge a long time ago. I'll never use a dating app again. The risk is just too great. I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to love again. I'm not sure if I'll ever feel safe again. But I'm alive. And that's all that matters. I'm trying to live my life again after all of this. It's still new to me. I hope I will be okay one day, and I'm hoping it soon. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, to be honest. It's something I've tried to bury, to chalk up to a bad dream or an overactive imagination. But the truth is, it happened, and it changed me. I've always been a bit of a late bloomer when it comes to dating. While my friends were navigating the choppy waters of relationships in high school and college, I was content with books and late-night talks. I finally decided to take the plunge into the online dating world after turning 28. Hinge seemed like the least predatory, I guess, of all the apps. Less about fleeting hookups and more about actually forming a connection. Or so I thought. My profile was pretty standard. A few decent pictures, a witty bio, a genuine desire to meet someone nice. I swiped cautiously, looking for guys who seemed intelligent, kind, and shared at least some of my interests. Then I matched with Liam. Liam's profile was intriguing. He had this intense, brooding look in his photos, like he was perpetually lost in thought. His prompts were insightful, bordering on philosophical. He seemed deep, sensitive, and mysterious. He described himself as a writer, which appealed to my own creative side. We started chatting, and I was immediately drawn in. He had this way of framing things, of looking at the world from a different angle. He asked questions that made me think, made me question my own assumptions. It was refreshing. We talked about books, movies, art, and our shared love of hiking. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, and I felt comfortable opening up to him in ways I hadn't with anyone else. After a week of intense messaging, we decided to meet up. He suggested a small, independent bookstore that had a coffee shop inside. It sounded perfect. The day of the date, I was a nervous wreck. I spent hours agonizing over what to wear, what to say, how to act. I wanted to make a good impression. When I finally arrived at the bookstore, Liam was already there, waiting for me by the window. He looked even more striking in person. Tall, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. He greeted me with a warm smile, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Maybe this wouldn't be a disaster after all. The date started off great. We browsed the shelves, talking about our favorite authors and discovering new ones. We grabbed coffee and sat at a small table, lost in conversation. He was even more articulate and engaging in person than he was online. He told me about his writing, his dreams of publishing a novel, his struggles with self-doubt. I shared my own aspirations, my fears, my insecurities. We laughed, we debated, we connected on a level I hadn't experienced before. As the hours passed, I found myself falling for him hard. But then, things started to shift. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible. He started asking me more personal questions, probing into my past, my relationships, my family. It wasn't inherently inappropriate, but there was a certain intensity to his questions that made me uneasy. He seemed to be searching for something, trying to uncover a hidden truth. Then he started talking about his own past, about a difficult childhood, about a traumatic event that had shaped his life. He didn't go into specifics, but he hinted at something dark, something painful. I tried to be supportive, to offer a listening ear, but his words made me feel uncomfortable. I felt like I was being drawn into something I didn't understand. As the date went on, his mood seemed to darken. He became more withdrawn, more introspective. He started staring off into space, lost in his own thoughts. I tried to bring him back to the present, to lighten the mood, but it was no use. He was gone. When we finally left the bookstore, it was late. He walked me to my car, and we stood there for a moment in the dimly lit parking lot. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a strange mix of longing and despair. I had a really good time, I said, trying to break the tension. He didn't respond. He just stared at me, his gaze unnervingly intense. I should go, I stammered, fumbling for my keys. He grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. Don't, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Don't leave me. I froze. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. He pulled me closer, his body pressing against mine. I could feel his heart racing, his breath hot on my neck. He leaned in to kiss me, and I hesitated. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. I pulled away, gently but firmly. Liam, I don't think this is a good idea, I said. He didn't let go of my hand. Please, he whispered. Just one kiss. I shook my head. I can't, I said. I need to go. He finally released my hand, his expression a mixture of anger and hurt. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove away as quickly as I could. I didn't hear from him for a few days, and I started to think that maybe I had overreacted. Maybe he was just a bit intense, a bit damaged, but ultimately harmless. But then, I started receiving messages from him. At first, they were just simple texts, asking how I was, telling me he was thinking of me. But then they became more frequent, more insistent. He would text me multiple times a day, sometimes late at night. He would send me long, rambling messages about his thoughts, his feelings, his dreams. I tried to be polite, to respond to his messages without encouraging him too much. But it was no use. He just kept escalating. He started showing up at places I frequented, the coffee shop near my apartment, the grocery store, the library. I would see him standing there watching me, his eyes filled with that same unsettling mix of longing and despair. I tried to avoid him, to ignore him, but he was always there, lurking in the shadows. One night, I was walking home from work when I saw him standing across the street. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned the corner and ran the rest of the way home. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door and peeked through the peephole. He was still there, standing across the street, watching my building. I closed the blinds and turned off the lights. I sat in the dark, trembling with fear. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I went to the police. I told them everything that had happened, showed them the messages, described his behavior, but they said there was nothing they could do. He hadn't threatened me. He hadn't physically harmed me. He was just being persistent. They told me to get a restraining order, but that was all they could do. I got the restraining order, but it didn't help much. He still found ways to contact me, to harass me. He would send me emails, leave notes on my car, even call my work. I changed my number, blocked his email address, and avoided the places he frequented. But he was always one step ahead of me. He seemed to know everything about me, everything I did. I felt like I was being stalked, hunted. I was living in a constant state of fear. I became withdrawn, isolated. I stopped going out, stopped seeing my friends. I was afraid to leave my apartment. Then, one night, I came home to find my apartment door unlocked. I cautiously pushed it open and stepped inside. The apartment was dark and silent. I flipped on the light and gasped. Liam was standing in the middle of my living room, holding a knife. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wild. "I love you," he said, his voice trembling. "I just want to be with you." I screamed and ran towards the door, but he grabbed me, pulling me back into the apartment. He pinned me against the wall, the knife pressed against my throat. "Don't make me do this," he said, his voice cracking. Just tell me you love me." I stared into his eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that if I said the wrong thing, he would kill me. I love you," I stammered, tears streaming down my face. He didn't move. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, he lowered the knife. He dropped it to the floor and backed away from me. "I can't do this," he whispered. "I'm sorry." He turned and ran out of the apartment, disappearing into the night. I called the police, hysterical. They arrived quickly and took me to the hospital. They found Liam a few hours later, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The investigation revealed that he had a long history of mental illness and had been stalking other women before me. I was lucky to be alive. It's been several years since that night, and I'm still trying to recover. I still have nightmares, still jump at shadows. I'm in therapy, trying to process what happened. I haven't been on a date since. I don't know if I ever will. I'm sharing this story not for sympathy, but as a warning. Be careful who you meet online. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't ignore the red flags, no matter how charming or intriguing someone may seem. Your life may depend on it. Hinge may claim to be different, but the internet is the internet, and predators are everywhere. I never thought it would happen to me, but it did, and I'll never be the same.